Hello, Dr. Stark, and thank you for accepting my invitation for this conversation and interview.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, so I think I first want to say how I got to know you yeah, in first place.
I would love to hear that.
I think it was some years ago when I was reading a book of Mark Widdowson, who unfortunately passed away last year. The book was named 100 Techniques of Transactional Analysis. And he actually mentioned your model in the introduction of the book, and he wanted to categorize different schools of TA. And then he mentioned 1%, 1.5%, and 2%, and he referred to your model, the modes of therapeutic action. And since then, I have used this concept many times in my presentations, in workshops, many places. And so it's really now an honor and privilege for me to have this opportunity to speak directly to you and get to know about your model uh, in depth, because I think it has really also changed. It was 1999, the book it was referred to, and there I think it was three models, three modes of action, and now it's five, I think, right? So
And there's a sixth planned for the decade from 2020 to 2030. But I have 5 more years to develop that. Then there'll be 6 modes of therapeutic action in the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy.
wow, so it's gonna be even more complicated. But yeah, with this introduction, I think I want you now to introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, how you got to uh, put it all together in this comprehensive model,
Yeah.
put all these analytical schools in such a comprehensive way that these actually complement each other, enhance each other, and not in opposite. I want to ask you more.
Thank you. Complement and enhance and interdependent. And yeah, there's overlap, but there are also features of each that are unique to that particular mode. So, I've been thinking about
Yeah.
how it is that I came to this. And basically, it has to do with how I learn. And so in the 1970s, so for people to do their math and then they know how old I am, in the 1970s, I was getting my training at the Boston Psychoanalytic, and it was the one person perspective. They didn't really call it one person, but it was sort of one person, the focus on the patient and what was going on in their head cognitively. So I called that the interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalysis. So I created my model one of my what came to be called my psychodynamic synergy paradigm. It's only more recently that I've taken ownership of my whole 5 models as the Stark method. I had to grow into that. But
Yeah.
anyway, so back then, psychodynamic synergy paradigm. So in the 1970s, I was building my interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalysis and doing a deep dive into it, and was learning a lot about it and then doing my own sort of thing with it, and came up with something that I called conflict statements that juxtaposed, on the one hand, the patient's adaptive capacity to know, and on the other hand, their defensive need to resist knowing.
Yeah.
So that in essence, it involved the treatment in this mode would involve evolving the patient by way of interpretations from resistance, the defense, rigid resistance, to insight. Eventually, because I wanted all the adaptations to start with the letter A, I had to say awareness, which is close enough to insight. So model one, the interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalysis, from the defense of resistance to the adaptation of insight or awareness. Model 1, 1970s. Then in the 1980s, oh my goodness, I was exposed more to the corrective provision or deficiency compensation perspective of self-psychology and other modes that speak to what I call absence of good. Later, Model 3 was to be a story about presence of bad. But Model 2, I got it, we're talking deficit. We're talking absence of good. And that being part of what creates the problem. And I sort of got it that Model 1 was a story about structural conflict, as it was called, or neurotic conflict, or intrapsychic conflict within the patient's head, where one person. Whereas Model 2, now we have the introduction of the therapist as an empathic, emotionally attuned self-object, performing self-object or caregiving or parenting functions for the child and then later for the patient. Now sort of a 1.5 person, where the one person is the patient and what they're feeling, their affect, what's going on inside of them, and the therapist, the best of who they are. So that's the half person. It's not all of who they are, but it's the best of who they are. So that in the 1980s became the corrective provision or deficiency compensation perspective of self-psychology. And I think along about then, I was developing the concept of relentless hope. I got lucky because relentless hope starts with an R, and that's the defense. In Model 2, because of, whereas Model 1, structural conflict, Model 2, structural deficit. I didn't say that, but right. Model 2, structural deficit. The deficit in terms of capacity to be a good parent unto oneself or a good caregiver unto oneself. And I always kind of go like this with my hand, to be able to have the capacity to be self-soothing, self-comforting, self-caregiving. When there's an impaired capacity to be a good caregiver unto oneself, there's a structural deficit. The deficit creates the need for the self-object therapist to provide from without those functions that the patient never had a chance to acquire during their growing up because there was absence of good. There wasn't reliable, consistent caregiving in the form of empathic attunement and mirroring and so on and so forth. So the need creates, the deficit creates the need for the therapist to be something like an ideal parent, which isn't really going to happen. It will, but then it won't. It will, but then it won't. So quite frankly, the patient gets caught up in relentlessly hoping against hope that maybe someday, somehow, the therapist will be the ideal parent, the ideal caregiver they never had reliably and consistently early on. Thus, the relentless hope, which speaks to a refusal to confront and grieve the reality of the objects, the object of one's desire, whether the transference object or a contemporary object or the infantile object, the refusal to confront and grieve the reality of the object's limitations, separateness, and immutability, the fact that the object cannot be forced to change. So in Model 2, it became a story about evolving the patient from relentless hope, the defense speaking to a refusal to grieve, to ultimately, and I got lucky on this one, sober, mature acceptance. There's the A word. That's the adaptation. Nobody said sober, mature acceptance is going to be fun, but it's sort of a sober, evolved, reflective, thoughtful acceptance of the reality that it was what it was, it is what it is. And there you have it. And to get there, so whereas in Model 1, interpreting is the cutting edge. That's the real catalyst. That's the agent. Model 2, that's something the therapist does for the patient. Model 2 is grieving, what the patient does, but the therapist facilitates it. Ultimately, by helping the patient, initially there'll be a positive, narcissistic self-object transference.
Yeah.
But inevitably, there will be empathic failures, or we can just say failures by the
Okay.
therapist.
Ruptures in the relationship.
Rupture in the relationship. And creating then a disrupted positive transference or disillusionment. And the working through of the disillusionment will be the way in which ultimately the patient evolves from relentless hope to sober, mature acceptance. That's model 2.
Okay.
Now, model 3 comes along, and lo and behold, so whereas model 1 is a 1 person, model 2 is a 1.5 person psychology, model 3 in the 1990s are like, oh my goodness, those folks at the William Allenson White Institute and Stephen Mitchell and Jessica Benjamin and Darlene Ehrenberg and Owen Rennick, like, wow, they really are onto something amazing here, focusing in more on the intersubjective perspective, what I then came to call the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory. Now, they were sometimes faulted for thinking of the unconscious, model 1, as simply a black box, that the focus was too much on the here and now of the analytic engagement. But I was busy thinking, model 1, we still remember it. That's about enhancement of knowledge about what's going on. Model 2, provision of a corrective experience affectively. So there's the safe space to grieve. And I forgot to mention this. The cool thing about grieving, this is something you should never try to explain to a patient. I've tried to explain it and made a fool of myself in my time. The cool thing about grieving is that as part and parcel of the grieving process, there will be adaptive transmuting, meaning structure building, capacity, internalization, that as part of grieving, as part of confronting the reality of the limitations, separateness, and immutability of the object of one's desire, adaptively, you figure, well, if I'm not always going to be able to have it out there, then adaptively is an unconscious something, but there's an internalizing of it so that you can have it as an internal resource for when the external is no longer there. It's adaptive. So
So not basically in the beginning focusing on structures and structural conflicts, but at the end, the result is internalization of new structures. And so the development of the ego is what we call.
well, although, yes, but I would have called it self-structure, keeping the language of self-psychology. So let me say, whereas, but thank you. Whereas model 1 is a story about the ego and
Yeah,
strengthening the ego. And during my training, we talked about ego strength.
yeah.
Model 2, self-psychology, their language just happens to be more the self, the cohesive self, self-structure, self-deficit or structural deficit. But so you're right about structure there, but it's sort of more specifically self-deficit. You know, I've since come to understand more about the particle wave duality of quantum theory or the observer perspective. I don't begin to understand quantum theory, but I understand a little bit. And the idea that there can be a certain something, but it's how you observe it, from what
Yeah.
position you observe it, that makes all the difference. So in model 1, it's still the same person, but you observe it and you think in terms of ego strength. Model 2, same person, but you think of it in terms of self cohesion, the integrated self. And then we're going to think in model 3 about the self in relation or the relational self. But anyway, so thank you. I didn't mean to. So structure, yes. So it is true. Yeah, I should clarify this more. I do say structural conflict for model 1. I say structural deficit for model 2, but I really should put in parentheses, I will do that. Self-deficit. I should do that to be in keeping with the language of self-psychology. Thank you. I actually really mean that. Yeah.
So you avoid saying ego because you think it's too limited. Self is more like the whole entity and can have different now we call self-states inside of it, or different parts, or
Yeah, yeah.
so in each developmental level, this can develop, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. No, that's right. I like that. That's right. Got different self states. Right, right. We're self, right. And again, what the focus is, what the perspective is, makes all the difference. But
The,
that's
mo-
included there. Yes.
the model two is a kind of reparenting or reorganization of these states to
The, the,
make,
the only reason I wouldn't quite say that, I had to have said that
yeah.
until in large part because of my dear friend Larry Hedges out in California. I'm in Boston, Cambridge. He knew my theory well enough, bless his soul, that he knew Model 1, structural conflict, Model 2, structural self deficit, Model 3, relational conflict, picking up on Stephen Mitchell's term and others before and since. And he said, Martha, he was like, Martha, you got to have a place for relational deficit.
Hmm.
Relational deficit, not self deficit, but relational deficit. Model 4, you got to do
Hmm.
it. And I am so grateful to him because he's the only one who knew my theory well enough to know what was missing. And what was missing was Model 4, relational deficit, which I then got to 2000 to 2010. That speaks to, and this is, I came recently upon Ofra Eshel's beautiful term, the emergence of analytic oneness. So in Model 4, which is an existential humanistic approach to easing despair and uh, facilitating the patient's surrender to
Hmm.
embracing life and being in relationship, and basically a reparenting. It's a regression to redo. It's not about grieving. Model 2 is about grieving. And it's a
Hmm.
wonderful, warm, good something. Kohut, go for it. Paulinana Ornstein, go for it. Model 4 becomes more specifically Winnicott, where there is a regression to redo so there can be a reset, a benign regression, not a malignant one, hopefully, or Michael Ballant, sort of the regressing to a state of harmonious, interpenetrating mix up between the patient and the therapist. And now we're talking about Model 4, relational deficit, existential humanistic approach. We're talking about the private self, Winnicott's true self, private self, vulnerable self, that where the conflict now is not Model 1, structural conflict between id and superego, with the
Hmm.
ego mediating. Now the conflict is around whether or not one even dares to be in relationship. It's too
Hmm.
terrifying. So now there's non-relatedness.
Hmm. It's very interesting that you put Winnicott in there. I think in my thoughts, I would always think of Winnicott between model two and three.
Yeah, I had him in Model 2 and 3 until Larry Hedges made me do Model 4. Yeah, Winnicott is both. Yes, I mean, Winnicott, as it happens, bless his soul, just as TA 1, 2, 3. And by the time I'm done with you, I hope 4 as well. I mean, that basically some of the broader based thinkers. So, whereas get it that sort of, oh, Model 1, oh, cognitive, oh, Model 2, affective, oh, Model 3, relational, oh, Model 4, existential. It's sort of like, yeah, CARE, care.
Hmm.
I mean, yes. So some of them sort of covered all sorts of things. And yes, Winnicott. So Winnicott, yes, all that wonderful good stuff, Model 2, even though his language wasn't specifically the language of self-psychology, he was just so cool that, I mean, whatever. But then also Model 3. But let me say, Winnicott, Model 3, intersubjective, his good enough parenting, his good enough environment is mostly, quite frankly, Model 2-ish, about just being a warm, good, wonderful, and not specifically Model 3, the here and now of the analytic engagement, and Darlene Ehrenberg's negotiating at the intimate edge, where the therapist brings more of her authentic self into the relationship. Winnicott was not about the authentic self in terms of the not so good stuff, but more about just being wonderfully warm and available. So that's why Winnicott, though Model 2, Model 3, because whatever, but Model 4, where he talked about the facilitating environment. And I personally want to put Winnicott a little more even in Model 4, but also Model 2 and 3, but Model 4, regression.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Michael Bolland, especially. Michael Bolland also would have been Model 2. But when I came upon, thank you, Larry Hedges, Model 4, so I go, I think maybe harmonious interpenetrating mix-up. So Model 2, for me, is more about lifting from some of the self-psychological literature, their concept of optimal disillusionment, which gives rise to adaptive as opposed to defensive. So adaptive, you internalize good. Defensive, you introject bad, which is what Model 3 is about. But Model 2, adaptive, transmuting internalization, copying from some of the self-psychology people. So I see the agent for transformation as being grieving in Model 2, whereas in Model 4, the word that I find is surrendering. And I lift from Masood Khan his beautiful concept of
Yeah, it's
facilitate.
so surprised you mentioned him because recently I'm reading his notebooks that is published by Karnak, and it's so interesting. I find it. Yeah. Yeah.
And with him, whose analyst was Winnicott,
Yeah.
we now have him writing about helping the patient overcome, these are his words, their dread of surrender to resourceless dependence, or Winnicott's absolute dependence on the therapist. And Ofra Eshel's Israeli analyst, emergence of analytic oneness. So let me say, so I was with Larry Hedges in California doing a talk there some numbers of years ago. He was quite frankly, lovingly in my face about, Martha, you need to add Model 4. You have structural conflict, you have structural deficit, self-deficit. You have relational conflict. You need relational deficit, Martha. And I'm saying, well, listen, I mean, okay, I put to you a challenge. So he's driving me to the airport. It says a big LAX. Okay. And I say, okay, well, there are three things that I need. Three things. And if we can come up with them, Larry, then I'm good. And I'm going to add Model 4. But I was quite sure we wouldn't be able to come up with it. So we need a defense that starts with R. Well, that was easy. Retreat, psychic retreat, like duh. And, or even since I was going to be calling it an existential humanistic approach to easing despair, relentless despair, and facilitating the development of primary trust and all sorts of good stuff. I was thinking retreat, schizoid retreat, or we could say nihilistic, that's not an R word, but rejection, that is, of existence. That's the defense in Model 4. And by the way, when I introduced Model 4, a lot of people wrote me anonymously and said, oh God, Martha, you're talking about me. Well, all five of them are talking about all of us. We all have aspects of neurotic Model 1, narcissistic Model 2, noxiously related Model 3, non-related Model 4, and non-actualizing Model 5. Those are the N words. All right, but back to Model 4. So I say to Larry, okay, so what are we going to call the defense? Retreat. That was easy. That's the humanistic component. And the existential component would be rejection of existence, nihilistic rejection of existence. Okay, well, we got that. All right, now the adaptation.
Yeah.
That has to start with the letter A. Sort of like, all righty. Well, from the humanistic perspective, yeah, that's about accessibility, availability. Or put kind of fancy like, we could say from relational absence, R word, relational absence, retreat, but relational absence, there's the R word, to authentic presence, there's the A word. However, I have mixed feelings about that because authentic was a word that I'd used in Model 3.
Yeah.
And now I'm cheating in a way if I say authentic presence. So it's sort of like,
So
I
it's like,
think
I think it's like in model 3, you want to really touch on the therapeutic stance when the therapist brings up his own unconscious into the room. But in model 4, they're both the sense of being of both people. So
the
like,
sense of being, right? A more existential continuity of being. Whereas model 3, you're right, in order to negotiate the transference, countertransference, entanglement, or edtronics messiness that exists in the space between patient and therapist, the therapist to be an authentic relational object. Da, 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 da. Model 4, it's more the therapist as a good enough mother or caregiver, good enough holding environment, facilitating environment. And it is authentic presence, but I think for the moment, I'm going to take that off the table and say from retreat to accessibility on the patient's part and also the therapist's part, but accessibility and availability. But the existential part of it is from nihilistic rejection of existence to existential, which is a little more evolved than nihilism, existential acceptance of its dualities, polarities, complementarities, uncertainties, paradoxes. Of course, I reused the word acceptance, and that word belongs in model 2. Oh, well. So life isn't perfect. But anyway, so there, go ahead, ask your question.
no, I'm just putting up my thoughts together, and I think
Yes.
as we go from model 1 to model 4, it's like we became cognitively able, then affectively integrated, and then relation
Affectively
regulated,
integrated. Affectively integrated, yep. Affectively cohesive. Cohesive. Do you mind using the word cohesive?
and then relationally, well, I say relatedness. I want to say something like,
Yeah,
uh,
relatedness, the actual what you're doing in the here
yeah,
and now.
and then
More harmonious relatedness, so it's not contentious, it's not noxious. So harmonious relatedness, yes, good. Now model 4.
so in model until model 3, it's more like a co-regulation that it happens.
Model 3 is co-construction, co-regulation.
But model 4 is like a courage towards life in general. So it's like
Yes, yes.
becoming, it's like about the vitality of the
Of the
person.
self, reclaiming of the self, the true self. And it's about that part of all of us that that has an absolutely broken heart and is not even relentlessly hopeful, which is model 2, but actually broken and on some level has retreated entirely from life. All of us have some part of that where we're just kept hidden. And that's why in model 4, I put the schizoid. When people say, we need a diagnosis, what's the diagnosis? And I don't really do diagnosis, but all righty, I'll try to be resilient and flexible. So as whereas model 1, more neurotic, model 2, narcissistic, model 3, more noxiously related, model 4, non-related, or
Yeah.
schizoid, or uh, addictions. Those are usually very private affairs. Um, or neurodivergence, the outliers. That tends to go more for model 4.
Okay. Hmm.
And so now we have from, yes, I mean, Winnicott's, the private self, the true self, blossoming into you know, exposing itself and coming into its own and re-engaging with life and revealing itself and accepting, the absurdities in life and the paradoxes and the complementarities and existential sort of something. It's a beautiful something. And it's not just about empathy, which was model 2, and grieving and filling in self-structure. This is more about re-engaging with life and reclaiming on some level the potential for who one potentially really could be. It's a reset, regression. This one, model 4, invites and encourages regression, benign regression, not malignant regression, but benign regression, gratification of ego needs, not id needs.
Mm. Mm. And then there is number 5.
And then there's number 5. So then from 2010 to 2020, I was busy. I had already been exposing myself to some really cool people and getting training. So I'd been doing, I actually learned it at the same time Bessel van der Kolk did, EMDR, back in the 1990s. And so I go, okay, I do EMDR. We'll get to this in a moment. I don't do it that well, but I do it. So I can kind of sit there reading from my paper. So SUD. So how many subjective units of distress when you think about that traumatic, whatever. And they don't mind. I mean, they know me by now and they just know I'm like reading from a sheet of paper. So EMDR. And then actually Pat Ogden, who founded sensory motor psychotherapy, and Bessel van der Kolk again, and some others in the 1990s. We went up to Vermont, or maybe it was New Hampshire. I get those mixed up, but I think it was up there, to train with Al Peso, the psychomotor psychotherapy. We got training with him that summer, and I PBSP, whatever, and then I went to Poland and Patricia Coughlin and some of the others, the ISTDP people.
Yeah.
And I was on the same panel with her, and she's like doing this incredibly cool stuff. And AEDP, Diana Foshen's like, shit, man, they're doing this really cool stuff. It's sort of short-term intensive. I'm sort of more longer-term, broader based. I'm a psychoanalyst trained at the Boston Psychoanalytic, but I sort of got it that there's a whole group of people who are doing something. It's not quite perhaps as broad-based or comprehensive, but by golly, it's powerful and impactful and really does the job. So then I introduced, then somehow I got it that I don't know how it came to me, but I got introduced to the concept of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And I fell in love with it. Basically, my understanding of it is, and it's something I'd kind of been doing all along with my models 1, 2, 3, 4. We are juxtaposing old bad narratives, limiting beliefs, emotional learnings, relational expectations, old bad, with new good, emotional learnings, limiting beliefs, relational expectations, the filters through which the patient is experiencing the world, filters arising from early on traumatic stressors, big T traumas, little t traumas that are embodied, and so on, such that they're kind of stuck. They have already acquired model 1 awareness, model 2 acceptance, model 3 accountability. I didn't say that, but that's from reenactment in model 3 to accountability for those reenactments of unmastered early on relational traumas. Model 4, they have accessibility and acceptance of life's paradoxes, but they're not actualized. They're not taking action. They're like stuck. So refractory inertia, there's the R word, to actualizing action. They're entrenched in conditioned reflexive reactions, and they're not doing what they should be doing to get on with their lives. So therapeutic memory reconsolidation is a story about jolting, dramatic, repeated juxtaposition, like in EMDR, old, bad, new, good, old, bad, new, good, right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain. The emotional, relational wisdom of the right brain juxtaposed with the analytic wisdom of the here and now left brain, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, to create optimally stressful, which again was one of my concepts that I sort of came to understand the power of, optimal stress. Optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. Come to find out, I think that's at the heart of all of these models fundamentally. So
That is what,
go ahead.
was one of my questions. You're already responding.
Yes, it's a mismatch experience. Model 1, in case we're curious, the optimal stressor, which is a mismatch experience, is cognitive dissonance.
Uh-huh.
Now, you'll see in a moment why I'm so excited about that. Notice that's the stressor, cognitive dissonance, which the working through of which it is an optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experience between what you know and what you find yourself feeling, cognitive dissonance.
Mhm.
Model 2, the optimal stressor is, now I want the optimal stressor to start with the letter D. Mhm. Disillusionment or disrupted positive transference. And it could be optimal disillusionment, but I use that more generally. So I'm going to call it affective disillusionment. So, model 1, cognitive dissonance. There's your mismatch experience. Model 2, affective disillusionment,
Of the positive transference, so the good
the
relation.
disruption of the positive one, and the working of that through, such that there's a mismatch between the illusion that had been
Yes.
and the dawning reality and the pain and the heartbreak and the grief of the disillusionment. They're working it through, grieving.
Hmm.
Thank you. Right. I feel you getting
Hmm.
that. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Now, number 3, the optimal stressor has to start with the letter D.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. So I was teaching at Smith College School for Social Work many years ago. And I'm sort of doing my thing up front and hopping around and doing this, that, whatever. Some guy in the back row, it's a big group, a lot of people, but some guy in the back row is, clearly on his cell phone. He has his hat on. Clearly, he's on his cell phone. I didn't say anything, but I'm sort of thinking, yeah, please, that's so rude. But anyway, so then I stand in front and I say, I need a D word.
Yeah.
I need a D word in Model 3. And suddenly from the back row, that guy looks up for a moment and he says, detoxification. And it's like, oh my God. Projective identification, negotiating at Darlene Ehrenberg's Intimate Edge, and where the therapist brings her authentic relational self, two-person, intersubjective, Jessica Benjamin, Adrienne Harris, and all them other folks. It really is relational detoxification, where the therapist brings to bear their own more evolved capacity to process and integrate on behalf of a patient who has these charged toxic boluses of pathogenic introjects or internal bad objects. Remember, it's presence of bad. Model 2 is absence of good. Model 3 is defensive introjection of bad pathogenic introjects that give
Mm.
rise to projective identification, which gets negotiated or navigated at the intimate edge of transference, countertransference, entanglement, messiness, edtronic. So model 3 is working through and resolving the destabilizing, growth incentivizing experience of relational detoxification because the patient has an investment in seeing the therapist as the same kind of critical that the parent had been. Now, what's their investment? In part because if the therapist is actually different from and better than what they had experienced as a child, that means that there could have been something better. Yes, thank
Now,
you for that
now I
expression on your
know.
face there.
Now I know what I have missed actually. If it's the good, better.
That it could have been that, and then they're going to have to confront that and grieve it. But no, 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 no. They defend against that by no, no, no. I know you're being critical. I know you don't understand. I know you this. I know you that. Their investment in it, the unhealthy part of their investment in their reenactment compulsion, where they're playing it out on the stage of the treatment and in their lives, is same old, same old. That's all they've ever known. And to get it that it could be different means they'd have to confront something they'd rather not. The healthy piece has to do with a desire to achieve belated mastery. So indeed, the optimal stressor is working through the relational detoxification where they both do and don't want the therapist to fail them. In the old ways, and Patrick Casement talks about the therapist's failure of the patient in ways specifically determined by the patient's early on history. And I add, internally recorded and structuralized in the form of internal bad objects or pathogenic interjects that are going to be compulsively and unwittingly reenacted on the stage of the treatment and in the patient's life. So the optimal stressor, the thing that creates the mismatch experience, which is what your brilliant question was formulated, and I anticipated it. Now we've done Model 1, cognitive dissonance. Whew, that's good. Cognitive, remember, Model 1, privilege is cognition. Model 2, affective disillusionment. Whew, that's good. Model 2, privilege is affect. Model 3, relational detoxification. Thank you to the fellow in the back of the room. Relational, whew, there's the R word. So we have CAR. Now Model 4. Okay, so Larry Hedges and I are still in the car. We're getting to the airport. We haven't quite yet seen LAX yet. And I'm thinking, okay, well, Larry, you know, we got retreat, and that's the defense, the R word, and we have the adaptation, the resilient adaptation. That's accessibility or availability. Okay, or from nihilistic rejection of existence to existential acceptance of its dualities, polarities, paradoxes, uncertainties, complementarities. Of course, iterative healing cycles of working through the optimal stressor, the optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. So I say, now, Larry,
Give me a word.
give me a word, or we're done here. So we're working and working and working. And at first we thought, because we kind of knew Masood Khan. Now we do know, by the way, Masood Khan did the bad thing. You know that, right? He did the bad thing. Yeah, he did the bad thing. Okay. But anyway, nonetheless, he had some brilliant thoughts. I mean, we have different parts of ourselves. He had a bad part, and then he had a brilliant part. So anyway, so we knew the concept of dread, working through your dread of surrender to resourceless dependence. Well, that's a good one. Okay. But then we also thought, well, we decided, actually, Larry and I, we decided, now we see LAX. I'm almost late for my plane, quite frankly. And we decided, all right, it's dependence. And at first, and we sort of thought, we left it as I'm rushing to catch my plane, how about Winnicott's absolute dependence? Because, of course, we know that developmental progression of Winnicott, from maturational progression, from absolute dependence to relative dependence toward autonomy. So, all right, so, and we're going to encourage them to regress to the stage of absolute dependence. But absolute's not a very sexy word and so on, but all right, okay, absolute dependence. In essence, Ofra Shell's and the emergence of analytic oneness, although I didn't know her concept at that point. But so I left it at, all right, absolute dependence. But Larry, I'm not entirely happy with this, but I'm halfway there. I get home. I sit down at my computer, a little bit agitated because sort of like, oh God, am I going to be adding Model 4 or not? I know I should, but whatever. I sit down and I think, well, Model 4 is a humanistic existential perspective approach to dealing with brokenness. I wonder what existential dependence would be, because that would privilege the word existential, right? Cognitive dissonance, affective disillusionment, relational detoxification, existential dependence. I could make up that term. I go online, I put in Google search, quote, existential dependence, end quote. Lo and behold, it's a concept that the cool people use. And it means depending upon another for one's very existence, for one's very identity. That's exactly what Model 4 is. Existential dependence, overcoming the dread of surrender to absolute dependence on another, which is what the patient never really had an opportunity to do early on. So they just progressed through the different stages, but having left some part of them Unresolved. Thank you, Larry Hedges. I mean, I feel like I have to go back and apologize to the patients in the first decades of my work when I hadn't fully appreciated what Larry learned way back. But do you see now how Model 4 is really quite different from Model 2? Model 2 is talking about filling in specific thank you, self deficits, impaired capacity to be a good caregiver unto oneself. It's not as much about the private self, the true self that's hidden behind a facade of the false self. Now, again, we're all aspects of all five, but when we're focusing more on the true self, Winnicott's true self, hidden, that's not really exposed, like your addictions and your neurodivergence or your ADHD or your retreat, or you're not really trusting, or you're this or that, or your lack of engagement, or you'd be willing to sort of die in your sleep that night. When my patients do acknowledge that, it's not really empathy per se that they want. That when they'll say, quite frankly, I feel such despair. I present to the world as a success. I'm a very successful engineer and I'm designing the bridge across the San Francisco Bay, whatever. But inside of me, I'd be willing to die tonight. That's not the language of Model 2. That's the language of Model 4, a deep, relentless despair. Model 2, the language is relentless hope that the object will be forthcoming. Model 4, on some level, the patient has given up hoping that the object will be forthcoming because there's relentless despair. That's what Larry was reminding me of, teaching me about. That's what I'm talking about here. Have I sort of gotten you a little bit excited about Model 4 here?
Course. And it's like, it's like in number 4, we are not looking for a shift or a change or something, but rather, as you say, a surrender that some things cannot be changed. The first thing that comes to,
Yes, 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 yes. I didn't even know that. Wait a minute. Thank you. Right. That some things can't even be changed. It's not about transforming per se. It's not about a change. Right.
and as you mentioned, neurodiversity or qualities like that, I also thought of sexuality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sexuality. Oh, and transgender stuff and sexuality stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, yes, you're right. That's a very private affair often. And so on. I have several patients with sex addictions, and they go to SLAA and SAA, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And that's a very private matter. In fact, I hadn't even heard about it for quite some time, Model 4, until they dared to expose that to me. No one else knows it, but they know it. And in the privacy of their own home, they're busy compulsively masturbating, doing their pornography, doing their child pornography and other such.
Yeah, I'm busy now reading a book written by Brett Carr. The name is Who's Been Sleeping on Your Head? And
Oh my goodness.
he has collected all the sexual fantasies of about 20,000 people from UK and America, and has categorized that into chapters of the book. And it's amazing. When people speak about the most private parts of their desires that no, but it can be
Well,
inside even to them.
I am going to, even to them, right? So let me just say, I do a lot of consultations on patients, one-shot consultations. And I have found that what I can do it with them because they don't know me very well yet. I can't do it with my patients with whom I've worked for some time. But I can ask them, I can say, what are the themes in your sexual fantasies? And I say it very sort of, I'm like an authority and sort of like I'm doing a consultation. And so I would need to know the themes, the recurring themes in their sexual fantasies. It doesn't occur to them that they could say, I'm not going to tell you. Whereas, once I know a patient over time, sort of like, hell, man, I'm not going to, that's too ashamed. No, 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 no. So they'll share the theme. And I have discovered that in their sexual fantasies, not even necessarily their dreams at night, but in their sexual fantasies, whether it's during lovemaking or their masturbatory fantasies, that's their diagnosis.
Mm.
in their sexual fantasy. Like, you don't bother to have a sexual fantasy about something that doesn't turn you on. Like, nobody would sort of like, well, I figure I should have a sexual fantasy about being sort of kind to the homeless. I mean, and that'll turn me on. That's not really what people have sexual fantasies about. They have it about their unmastered early on relational traumas. So in that sexual fantasy, which they keep private, like they never imagined that somebody was going to say, like, you could have been in a relationship for decades with your dear one, and you never thought to just say, oh, by the way, what turns me on is when I think about winning over my dad from my mom. We don't really say that out loud. We just think it. So that's why this book by Brett Carr just sounds just fascinating. There was also a book early on called, I think, My Mother's Garden or something, or early on, a similar something, or Mothers and Garden, or Secret Garden, something like that, or The Secret Garden, or something like that. A similar something about the sexual fantasies that people have. But yeah, that's about Model 4. See, thank you. You're helping me to understand better, Ashkan, about Model 4 as I'm feeling you thinking about Model 4 and how it is indeed similar in certain ways to Model 2, but also very different. It highlights a certain something that's really quite different. For now, the conflict is around then whether or not one dares even, and now we think about, of course, Harry Guntrip, who wasn't busy talking empathy. He's busy talking about how the patient presents to treatment, but they're not really there. And he who had an analysis with both Fairbairn
Yeah.
and Winnicott. And I think of Guntrip as the sad man because it sort of feels as if there's a way in which, and he writes about it, the schizoid phenomena, that he was never really quite able to deliver all of himself into a relationship and have it accepted for what it was. And dare to expose it. And Model 4 is when you really dare to expose to yourself. I like it that you said that, to yourself even, and to the person seated opposite you, your most vulnerable, your most precious, your most private self, including, and in there, in your true self, is not only sort of some bad stuff, but spontaneity and creativity and all sorts of good stuff. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about becoming all of who on some level you were meant to be, except it finding and reclaiming yourself as you dare to. So it's not even changing. Thank you. You said that. Not even transforming. It's more about becoming. It's a humanistic existential perspective, not specifically about empathy per se, but being able to encounter now very belatedly what you were never blessed enough to have the experience of early on, which is the opportunity to be you, to be absolutely dependent. And way back then, to be able to just be anything you wanted to be, and to be able to have a mommy or daddy or a caregiver, I want to be politically correct, a caregiver, able to even anticipate what absolute dependence, what might be something you would need. It's just a fundamental something, but you never had that. So you just evolved even so. And you present now as a very famous engineer designing a bridge. And meanwhile, you'd be willing to die that night in your sleep because whatever, you're not really engaged in life. That's why I call it a humanistic dash existential perspective.
Mm. Mm. Wow.
So what do you
Yeah.
think? What do you feel? What do you think?
Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm thinking what you did is you actually made a big jigsaw puzzle of
I
all the
did
different approaches and
a
all the,
flow sheet, a big master spreadsheet, jigsaw puzzle,
yeah,
and I'm putting the pieces in.
yeah, and each are taking the space for one aspect of our being. And um, as I was trained, I was trained in TA and I was trained in ego state therapy, which is more a trauma approach, now focusing on polyvagal theory and body psychotherapy and also memory reconsolidation, like the Model 5, I was always having these confusions. How am I going to put this all together? And here is now me finding the answers, So that's why I'm
Well,
so
because in truth, I would like to say, I mean, and part of why it has been so exciting for me to be developing this through each of the decades of my own career is in my own mind, I do believe that therapeutic memory reconsolidation, which clearly you know well, that though it's more obviously relevant in Model 5, and I'll say a little more about Model 5 in a moment if we do still have time here. Do we still have time? Yes.
I have no limitations as much as you have time.
You
So I
have
have
what? You what?
limitations on time. So I
You
would,
do or don't?
no, don't,
You
don't.
don't. Oh,
No.
good. Oh, good. Thank you. All right. No, I'm good too. All right. So even though in Model 5, it's more obviously therapeutic memory reconsolidation, which all of these really cool people who do neuro-linguistic programming and EMDR and ACT and ISTDP and AEDP and somatic experiencing, thank you, Peter Levine, and somatosensory and psychomotor psychotherapy, all that there. It really
Hypnotherapy.
is. What?
And, and
And TA. What?
hypnotherapy with hypnosis. I mean, clinical
Oh,
hypnosis.
hypnotherapy. Yes, one of my supervisees is a hypnotherapist. And I was like sitting there at one point, I'm saying like, oh my God. And sort of like he was very respectful, but he said, yeah, Martha. Yeah, hypnotherapy. Yeah, therapeutic memory consolidation. You got that right. So finally. But anyway, and I actually even directly made contact with like David Feinstein. He does EFT, and em, no, emotional freedom
Okay.
emotional freedom techniques. Yes, yes. And tapping. Thank you. Yes. And he absolutely is all about therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And then we talked to Richard Schwartz, his IFS, and sort of like, well, Dick, Martha wants to sort of say that therapeutic memory reconsolidation, fundamentally is sort of an umbrella concept. And so Dick thought about it and he said, well, there are many other things too, but okay, yeah, okay, good. Yep, therapeutic memory reconsolidation, where you're juxtaposing and creating optimally stressful, growth incentivizing, anxiety titrating, mismatch
Yes.
experience. Now, let me just say, the reason, so relentless hope I'd come up with way back, the idea of not all hope is good. But I lecture in the integrative medicine world, and it was in that world where we talk about high intensity interval training, right? And we talk about superimposing an acute injury on top of a chronic one, and basically optimal stress. So
Yeah.
I got it from that world. That's sort of
Mm.
like I'm bringing that into this world. So that's why optimally stressful is so important. Just the right balance between anxiety provoking challenge and anxiety assuaging support. So optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. All right. Obviously, in Model 5, we're
Mhm.
talking about juxtaposing, and think EMDR, think hypnotherapy, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, rapid, jolting, dramatic. But by the way, in all four other models, ultimately, we're juxtaposing old bad with new good, like Alexander and French back in the 1940s talked about the corrective emotional experience. Now, they did it in such a way that people said, nah, it's too contrived. But when you
Yeah.
think about it and work it and do it a little this, that, whatever, so like, no, they were absolutely onto the idea of there will be, and I call it the entrenched, the entrenched, comma, conditioned reality of what is,
Mm. Mm.
i.e., old bad, and juxtaposing the enlivening quantum possibility of what could be. And you juxtapose those old bad, the conditioned, the sobering, the entrenched, conditioned reality of what is, the knee-jerk, reflexive, mindless. You juxtapose a more thoughtful, a more mindful, a more envisioned, a more quantum possibility of new good, what could be, and you juxtapose. And classical psychoanalytic, where you have the patient lying on the couch forever and so on, basically they're old bad and sort of like, well, here's a new good, by the way, a new good way of looking at things. Sir Francis Bacon said, knowledge itself is power. And sort of like inside awareness, now we came to discover that sometimes it's okay and that's enough, but sometimes you need Model 2, Model 3, Model 4, Model 5, and probably Model 6, the somatic spiritual, which I'm not evolved enough spiritually to be able to write about it, but I'm getting there. But anyway, so so therapeutic memory reconsolidation, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I sort of got it and get it that all 5 models. So that's why the Stark method in one sentence, which is a big run-on sentence, but I can capture the essence of the therapeutic action in all 5, and ultimately all 5 modes of therapeutic action, namely generating optimally stressful, growth incentivizing, mismatch experiences that are going to create a little bit of internal tension and homeostatic imbalance when you're juxtaposing old bad, ambivalently cathected, old bad, defenses are ambivalently cathected, old bad, with new good, ambivalently cathected, new good. You juxtapose them. And it's the working through and resolution of that dynamic tension between that constitutes the therapeutic action. Admittedly, it's belated, but it's a belated opportunity to transform. And this is where that observer perspective, the particle wave duality of quantum theory, which again, I do not totally understand at all, but I understand little pieces of it. This is where this becomes relevant, such that what had once been experienced as a traumatic stressor, big T trauma, little t traumas, but had been experienced as a traumatic stressor, which had given rise to distorted, old, bad, disempowering narratives, that there can be experienced as a result of working through, by way of working through these different 5 optimal stressors, be experienced as an optimal stressor. That there very thing that happened, experienced as traumatic back then when you were all alone and you didn't have internal reserves. And so you developed all sorts of old, bad, distorted, disempowering ideas about the world is cruel, the world doesn't love me, they're abandoning me, they're critical, whatever. By working on it belatedly in the treatment, those there become optimal stressors.
Yes.
To which you can respond adaptively. So I'll give you an example. So the patient came to me for a consultation, and she'd met a handsome fellow, very charming fellow at a party, and he said, I'll take you home. And she thought, you know, the guy's handsome, he's well-spoken, let's go for it. So she got in the car, and this had happened years earlier, and he actually ended up driving her into the woods, and he tried to rape her. Now, as it happens, she had managed somehow to get away, but she still felt just traumatized by the fact that her judgment had been so off, that this horrible fellow had tried to rape her, and she had sort of shut down and sort of experienced all men as whatever. So anyway, she tells me this story is one of many. And I say to her, in essence, yeah, but you got away. You had the capacity to fight for your survival, and you got away. So the very same thing, which was a traumatic something, had been reframed, recontextualized as, quite frankly, The story of her life is that she is a survivor and a triumphant one. And that there got lucky on that one. In that moment, something, I mean, her whole life didn't change, but something did shift. So therapy is about transforming what had once been a traumatic stressor, giving rise to rigid defenses in order to survive, becomes an optimal stressor, which creates impetus and opportunity for there to emerge more resilient, more reflective, more mindful adaptations. From defense, rigid defense, to adaptation, more resilient adaptation. Or in the words of ACT, lifting completely from acceptance and commitment therapy, from psychological rigidity to psychological flexibility or resilience, or lifting from Freud from low-level defense to higher-level defense, or talking more ego psychology, to a more adaptive response, from a defensive reaction to a more adaptive response. So that my Stark method, on some level, there's an all-encompassing way to look at the therapeutic action and how it is that a patient advances from rigidity to incrementally, gradually, to more resilience. And it's not that you necessarily get all the way there. It's not an absolute, but it's that, and I know that for me in my life, moment by moment, stressors, they happen all the time.
Yeah.
I get a letter in the mail and it's like from the IRS. And they just wanted to say that they knew my address had changed. But I see the return address and like, oh my God. It's how we moment by moment position ourselves in relation to that environmental stressor, either from the outside or from within.
Yeah,
That,
if you're allowed, I take this to the therapy room, what you're just mentioning. And I want to ask you this because you speak of flexibility. I want to ask, how was it for you as a therapist to be flexible enough to shift between these modes?
oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, since I'm the one who came up with sort of the overview, I kind of know it pretty well. So it's a little easier for me. But let me say,
Yeah.
in the moment, that is a brilliant question, and thank you. Where the patient is in the moment, like their next sentence, I am a lot about not quite the extreme of beyond without memory and without desire, how I position myself in the moment. It's not quite that extreme. However, I do work moment to moment. And if in the moment I'm going to give something to capture each of the five, if in the moment the patient is just like really jammed up and neurotic and struggling and like, oh my God, I can't get together my tax information, I can't complete my dissertation, I can't this, I can't this, that, whatever. So, oh, model one, probably a more cognitive interpret of something. I want to help them to become more aware of the forces raging within. Or if they're busy talking about, I work so hard at work, why can't I be busy getting a promotion? My friend does. She got the promotion. Why can't I get the promotion? And I'm busy thinking like, oh my God, relentlessly hopeful. You know, the relentless pursuit of what the panel of 10,000 objective judges would have said, forget it, it's not going to happen. And I'm thinking, boy, they have a lot of grieving to do because they're not confronting the reality of the object's very real limitations, separateness, and immutability. So I'm thinking, well, model two. So in that moment, like I lost track of that 2 seconds earlier, I was doing an interpretation. Now I'm thinking grieving, disillusionment statement. All right, but then like a bit later, and it doesn't progress 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm just telling you this. At some point in the treatment, it's clear to me that I say stuff and they're fighting me. The here and now engagement, like, oh my God, noxious relatedness, model three. It's like, oh my God, I can't get anything right. So now I'm going to focus a little bit more on negotiating at the intimate edge. I thought I'd been helping them grieve. I thought I was doing interpretations. Now we need to negotiate because clearly there's something going on here. So immediately we're zeroing in on accountability and negotiating and navigating transference, countertransference, entanglement, and projective identification and messiness. But then maybe I say something, and again, it doesn't happen in this progression, but I'm telling you in this progression, I might have said something and they retreat. And it's very clear. And by the way, they can't come next time, come to find out, because there's a scheduling problem. They can't come next time. I'll pay you, but I can't come. I'll come in 2 weeks. It's like, whoa. So then I'm knowing that in the moment, I've done something that has prompted their retreat. And so they're hidden now, and they're not really sharing what's going on. They're gone and I can't find them. They're not accessible. They're not available. And so then I might say something like a facilitation statement. Model 4, they're called facilitation statements, a la Winnicott, facilitating environment. So I might say, a part of you, desperately wanting to be known, seen, heard,
But it's hidden.
understood. What?
But it's hidden.
But it's hidden. Yes. But another part of you terrified of being found. And sort of like, yeah, it's hidden. And they're terrified of being found. Hidden, and they're terrified of being found. And they're mixed about it. They're conflicted, ambivalent about being in relationship. Now, let me say, I still haven't decided. I'd be curious to know what word you'd like me to use, whether it's a but or an and, or I just sort of move over it and don't say anything. A part of you desperate to be seen, heard, understood. Another part of you terrified of being found. So is it but another part of you or and another part of you? If I'm thinking Dick Schwartz and parts of us are like and another part of you, or do I want to highlight more the defensive quality of it? But as you did, you went intuitively there too, as do I. But that's hidden, and more to the point is you're terrified of being found, which is why you do keep it hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you got it exactly. But yearning and longing, but you keep it hidden because you're terrified of being found. You got it exactly. And saying that to a patient is a helpful way to sort of get named. I mean, there are other things you do too, but you can do that. You can do that. You can get that said.
It's it reminds me of a quote from Winnicott when he says
Yeah, I know. Joy, and yeah.
so not to be
Yeah,
found.
that's a beautiful one. I can never say it all over again. I get it all mixed up, but it's a joy to be whatever, but, and whatever. And therefore, yes. Can you say it? Can you say it? It's a joy
Hidden and a disaster not to be found.
and a disaster not to be found. And the question would it be, but a disaster not to be found or and a disaster not to be found? And I think in the literature, they actually quote it as sometimes and, sometimes but. But yeah. That's my sentence that I use. So in model 1, I say, where id was, there shall ego be. In model 2, I say, pretending that it can be when it can't is how people break their hearts. Elvin Semrad, one of my mentors, said that. Pretending that it can be when it can't is how people break their hearts. And model 3, I go, the therapist's capacity to tolerate what the patient finds intolerable is the hallmark of a successful projective identification.
It's the containment of the
The
therapy.
containment, the containment, the containment, the containment. And especially important because in model 3 are character disorders and the borderline. Okay, and in model 4, the quote is certainly that there that you just said so well, Winnicott's thing. And Simon and Garfunkel, I am a rock and a rock never cries. A rock feels no pain and an island never cries. The retreat. So therefore, you don't have to worry about feeling interpersonal pain or having crying because of heartbreak. I am a rock, I am an island, because a rock feels no pain and an island never cries. And there are people, literally, I told you this, who write me and say like, oh my God, that's my song. Well, that's part of them, for sure. Now, model 5, let me just say, so in those moments of over the course of a treatment, where you've done all sorts of Model 1 conflict statements, Model 2 disillusionment statements to facilitate their grieving in order to fill in self-defect or deficit, either works, and Model 3 negotiating at the intimate edge in order to help the patient become more accountable, and Model 4, creating a space for them to be able ultimately to find who they are and reclaim themselves. And yet there's a way in which on some level they're entrenched. They're neural entrenchment, refractory inertia, and they're rooted to the spot. And they're not really moving forward in their lives and actualizing and doing stuff. That's when, based on my exposure to all these wonderful good people, ISTDP, AEDP, and all those initials, I got it that shit, man. I mean, and I hardly can even bear to say my name in the same sentence as Freud's, but I know that Freud had said eventually that he had found that he needed to alloy the pure gold, the gold of pure psychoanalysis with the alloy of metal or something like that. I can never get those quotes right. And I guess he didn't mean quite the same thing as I'm meaning, but I realized that my sort of, whereas models 1, 2, 3, 4 are more informed by psychoanalytically informed concepts,
Yes.
like the impact of the past on the present. Mm-hmm. The impact of the past on the present. And if we don't remember it, we're condemned to repeat it. All right, models 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And we're ever busy recreating in the here and now the early on. That's never been fully mastered, worked through, grieved, processed, integrated, whatever. Model 5, I've decided this isn't exactly always what their folks describe it as, but I describe my Model 5 as not like models 1 to 4, the relationship between the past and the present. Mine in Model 5 is the relationship between the present and the future, leaning into the edge between the present and the future. And so now in a quantum disentanglement statement, so let me just say, oh, and there's the D word, disentanglement. Quantum disentanglement, that's the optimal stressor. There's your mismatch experience. And I'm going to tell you what it is in a moment, because all of these interventions have a comma in the middle. Model 1, the therapist interprets for the patient. Model 2, the therapist facilitates the patient's grieving. Model 3, I'd mentioned this earlier, patient and therapist negotiate at their intimate edge. Model 4, the therapist just simply provides a facilitating environment to help the patient overcome their dread of surrender to resources dependence. And in the process, the therapist herself delivers her heart into the relationship. So to be profoundly, powerfully transformative, or just something for the therapist as well. In Model 5, with quantum disentanglement statements, the patient and the therapist co-create, co-construct, co-rewrite the patient's narrative. Both. You sit there with pencil and paper. Nowadays, people, of course, use little cell phones, but I still use a piece of paper. But anyway, so in the session, you co-create it, you co-write it, and then the patient at home can read it, and we both contribute to it. And the first half of a quantum disentanglement statement, where our goal is to disentangle from the toxicity of the past and to let's see, disentangle and to rescript narratives, stories, whatever, and to update. I don't know, maybe update and rescript. Anyway, those 3 words are relevant. I forget which direction which sequence I use them in. But so now the first half has to do with the here and now, and it's an embodied thing, and it's painful, and it's old bad, and it's naming, and it's like, and it starts with I. Patient and therapist write this together. I feel just so horrible about my body. I feel I was always told when I was growing up, you're too fat, you can't eat that, you're going to get even fatter, and you're not smart enough, and you're never going to make it out in the world. And so now I hesitate. I don't want to go out into the world. I want to stay at home where it's safe, because I can't bear the thought of going out into the world because it's too scary. It's going to hurt. I know it. I know it. Well, that was the first half. And the second half is, but I can envision the possibility. Now, there are 3 parts to the second part of the sentence. The first part is envisioning a preferred, a better way of being outcome.
That makes complete sense. I know all the trauma therapies that I've been trained on, like EMDR or ego state therapy, they all have some part for future orientation
In a way that classical psychoanalysis does not.
no.
And self-psychology does not. And contemporary relational theory does not. Now, I mean, they know about the future, but that's not, they don't privilege it. That's not the focus. And even existential humanistic, which is sort of kind of, it's not so much about the envisioned future self or possible self. There's a whole theory of possible selves, one of my students mentioned to me. So thank you for saying that, Ashkan. I appreciate that. So yes, now in the second half, there are three parts. I can envision the possibility of maybe someday being out in the world and feeling good about the way I look.
Mm.
Second part, I know that I therefore need to reposition myself in terms of how I live my life. I need to change. Now, let me just say, in my training as to be a classical psychoanalyst, if I'd ever suggested to the patient that they're going to need to change, I would have been shot through the heart. I mean, you don't suggest that. The patient, they'll get to it or not. And by the way, they didn't tend to, and so on. But in Model 5, together we're co-creating and we're feeding off of each other. We're co-constructing, co-writing, re-scripting their life story for the future. And so the second part of three, the first one, envisioning what could be. The second one is taking ownership of they need to change. God damn it, they need to change. Not relevant to models 1, 2, 3, or 4, not focused. They need to change. So well, now there's a concept. Oh my God, I need to change. That's autoplasty, whereas alloplasty is when you want the world to change. Autoplasty is, I know I got to change. So they know, so part two, they recognize they need to change. And part three, and this is because I listen to shows like Judge Judy and Hot Bench, you know, these shows about court and stuff and so on. Literally, the third part is they do hereby commit to taking action in alignment with their vision of who they would want to be. Now, let me say, if indeed you try to introduce a quantum disentanglement statement prematurely, which I've done on many occasions, the patient says, I can't envision what it would be like. All righty then, we're not ready for Model 5. Let's go back to 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not able to envision it. They say, I can't envision what it would be like being out in the world and feeling good about the way I look and feeling proud of myself. Can't imagine it. All righty, back to models 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's probably more towards the end of the treatment that this can be
It probably is when they've acquired, thank you, that's well said. Yeah. Although it can happen during a little bit around a particular something, but more generally it gets introduced where you're kind of tying up some loose ends. They still haven't lost that weight. They still haven't stopped smoking. They still haven't completed their dissertation, though they've done so many other things. They didn't get in their tax information, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, probably a little bit more towards the end. But not necessarily, but probably. So basically, the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy, which used to be called my psychodynamic synergy paradigm. And I actually even, from Shutterstock, I bought this, it was $35, and I bought this lovely compass that says synergy on it. And so I have it. And then I've added in Gentil Sans Regular, which is the font that I've come to love. It says the Stark method. And down below it says the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy. So anyway, it really is about the synergy of what there I said, optimally stressful, growth incentivizing, mismatch experiences, the working through and resolution of which constitutes the therapeutic action in all models, such that you advance from mindless rigidity, once necessary for survival, to survive, to more flexible, resilient resilience, making possible now not just surviving, but thriving. From surviving to thriving, from traumatic stressor to optimal stressor. And an upcoming talk that I'm giving is called The Holding and the Provocation, navigating the edge between support and challenge in contemporary psychodynamic treatment,
Wow.
where the holding is a story about that wonderful term that I do now use. It's not mine, but I love it. Homeostatic attunement. So Jim Herzog and Salman Akhtar elaborated on it, introduced the concept of homeostatic attunement, being with the patient where they are, exactly where they are, the holding as backdrop, but then introducing the provocation, whereby you introduce the challenge, the optimal challenge, the anxiety provoking, but ultimately growth promoting challenge.
Mhm. Mhm.
Cognitive dissonance, to create cognitive dissonance, affective disillusionment, relational detoxification, existential dependence, and quantum disentanglement, the working through and resolution of which constitutes the therapeutic action. The body can't tolerate. Walter Buchanan taught us that the wisdom of the body is such that it can't tolerate for extended periods of time a state of internal imbalance or homeostatic disequilibrium. And so it, with its infinite wisdom, will do whatever it needs to do, hopefully adapt as opposed to defend, in order to recover and restore its balance, hopefully at ever more evolved and ever more integrated, ever more harmonious levels of balance and harmony and adaptive capacity. Amen.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. So I got my answer. It's for you a moment to moment.
It is. It really is. It's moment to moment. Thank you for saying that.
Person is guiding you all the time, where
Yes.
by the subject they are bringing probably to each session. So
I'm
I
sorry, what's the word and what?
or what they bring in to each session, right?
Moment by moment. So that,
Oh,
quite frankly, it is so easy for me to be moment by moment with a patient. So I've done, I don't know if I dare admit this, but I've done 20 or 21 patients in a day. Now, some people would say, like, oh my God, how can you do so many? I love it because I'm just in the moment with my patient. And by the way, I don't know, you know, this is an Oura ring. Do you have those over there? OURA ring. And what it does is it records a lot of things, including my stress level. And people use it. And at night, it shows you how much REM sleep you get, how much deep sleep, your heart rate variability. It's kind of cool.
I
All
don't
right.
know. I have the watch.
Yeah, you have the watch. You have the same thing. You have the watch. I have found that in my work with patients, so there are four options. You could be stressed, you can be engaged, you can be relaxed, or you can be restored. In my work with my patients, I'm restored. Even when I, quite frankly, you can tell I have energy, uh, it's restored. I might even be really, as some of my patients would say, I know you're probably going to get in my face about this. And I say, you're right. I'm going to get in your face about this. That's the optimal stressor. My patients learn that that's sort of what we do, stronger at the broken places. And I'll get in their face and I'll say, right, I'll say what I say, but it all records itself, you on your watch, me on my ring, that, I am in my element. I am with them. I am engaged with them at their cutting edge. I believe that people want to grow. And I believe that not only do they have innate resilience, i.e., they're from the get go, but they develop over time adaptive resilience. Just as, for example, we have innate immunity. I lecture about this in the integrative medicine world, innate immunity, and we acquire immunity. We get adaptive immunity. So too, with respect to resilience, we have innate resilience and a capacity to handle whatever might come our way. And then as a result of advancing from rigidity to more resilience, graduated incremental, we acquire more and more resilience, such that when we're out in the world, moment by moment, stuff happens. I get the letter from the IRS, and for a moment, like, oh my God, and then, but I can handle it. I have become ever better able to handle that. Whereas my dear sweet gunner, he's my dear sweet gunner of 45 years, if I do actually get a little worked up and like, oh my God, he'll say, Martha, he'll say, remember what you write about, which is we want to light a candle instead of cursing the darkness. And sort of like, oh, touche, good point. So rather than like, oh my gosh, I got all this or that, what will I do? It's sort of like figure out a way to process and integrate it and handle it and make of it an optimal stressor that enables you to be continually growing and evolving and transforming from a little caterpillar to an ever bigger and more expansive and more free butterfly.
I was going to ask you how you explain this all this treatment or generally the psychotherapy simply to your clients. And I think now you responded, but still curious how you, because it's a very complicated process. It's very complex. It in each mode, different processes happening. Maybe sometimes I can assume altogether happening. And I personally find it sometimes difficult to explain to,
I
uh,
have a good answer for you.
yeah.
I default to model one, and they're fine with that. For me to try model two, model three, model four, model five is like, oh my God. Model one, in essence, I'll say our work will help you to understand increasingly, develop insight, awareness of the undertow, what it is, the treacherous undertow, what it is that's getting in the way of your being able to live the kind of life that you want. So I'm actually really talking about their ego, and I'm just sort of collapsing everything into that. And they say, oh, wow, okay, well, that's good. Nobody, they're not really thinking, oh, should I negotiate at our intimate edge? And can I regress to when I was a baby and do a reset? And what about getting my taxes done? Or what about empathy and filling in deficit? They don't tend to do that. Now, let me say, in my time, I mean, again, I make so many mistakes in every session, but the important something is to hold yourself accountable and sort of figure out a way to kind of work through it even so. In my time, I've made the mistake, and I've done it several times, I'm sure, but eventually I learned, of trying to explain to patients in model two. So patients will come in and on some level they sort of think that if they didn't get the good stuff back then, that they'll come to the treatment and they'll get it now.
Mhm.
And I've even had patients say, I come to therapy who are crying because they're grieving, fortunately. I don't come to therapy to cry. I come to therapy to feel better.
Mm.
So I've made the mistake of trying to explain, well, you'll be able to feel better by first crying for you to be able to deal with when you don't always get what you would have wanted, i.e., disillusionment, disrupted positive transference, and for you to grieve that and in the process adaptively to internalize all the good that I have been giving you, such that you can preserve internally a piece of the original experience of external support and external goodness. I've tried to explain that. I humiliated myself. That is so not understandable. So I don't explain it. I just sort of like let them sort of grieve it and rage at me and this and that, whatever. And hopefully, as part of that, they will adaptively internalize good stuff.
Yeah, but I can understand that it's actually you think it's enough to give them a cognitive understanding of it from in the
It satisfies them for the moment. I don't think that they really need to have an understanding. They
mm,
will, how about this? 2 years, 3 years into the treatment, they say, this is good. And I do feel that I'm very different from the way I had been. But I know there's more work to be done going forward. Martha, how do you conceptualize, what we'll be doing? I say to them, how would you describe what we have done? And they
mm.
say, well, I don't know. I come in and I talk about what matters. I say, well, that's what we're going to continue to do.
Yeah.
So I don't feel that it's my position. I know the stuff. I mean, if ever anybody knew, had thought about and spent a lifetime thinking about the process, I mean, believe me, they wouldn't. I mean, I got it, but I don't tend to. And most patients don't feel ultimately they need to understand how it works. Now, let me say, I do have one patient. She has become very dear to me. She said right out, I'm not going to talk about myself. Okay. Now, Now that, that's sort of like, well, okay. All right. So what I do with her is we kind of talk theory. She's
Oh.
very smart, and I will often say to her, and I'll be telling her something, and she'll say, wow. And then I'll say, now tell me what you take from what I've just said. And she'll repeat it back, but even better. And I have to like write it down. I say, like, oh my God, that's even better than what I was saying. And then interestingly, she might come up with something like, as she did the other day, Martha, I realize that whenever I reference my mother, I always say, my mother. Whereas when I talk about my father, I say my dad. Huh.
Mm.
And I went, huh, hmm, interesting. Now, I didn't say, oh, I wonder what that says about you or your relationship with your mother versus with your father. I didn't. I mean, patient, patient, patient. Or here's one. I mean, we'll get there. Now, she and I have come up with this wonderful image. It's really quite compelling. And that is, okay, so like a ball of clay. Okay, ball of clay. And I'd like it to be colored a beautiful blue. That's my favorite color. Surprise. Anyway, a beautiful blue ball of clay. Now, there's a concept, and I explained this one to her, and she loved it. You have a ball of clay, you stick your finger into it, and there's then an indentation. Pull your finger out. What happens to the indentation? It's still there. That concept is this beautiful word that, again, I talk about and teach in the integrative medicine world. It doesn't tend to be involved here with psychotherapy. It's called hysteresis, Hysteresis, hysteresis. And I can't remember whether it is or isn't same origin as hysterectomy or hysteresis, the woman's uterus and so on and so forth. Hysteria, of course, and hysterectomy. I think it's not related. But anyway, hysteresis, which means that even though the current situation has changed, the damage still remains. Is that like an incredible concept? So I've explained to her that when parents, like for example, her alcoholic mother, but whatever, when parents put their fingers in, even though now the mother's dead, whatever, they still have the indentation. So that was absence of good. The mother didn't provide in all sorts of ways that the mother could have, should have, model two. But then with my patient, I'm talking, I say, well, there is another concept. Sometimes in the ball, in the clay, not only is there absence of good because you now have something missing, but you have presence of bad. She said, well, what you could do is like you stick your finger in and they're like germs and cooties on the finger and they penetrate the substance of the ball. So even though your finger's gone, now there's presence of bad contained in the ball. I said, exactly. Model 3, presence of bad. So anyway, so now what was I saying? So she gradually, over time, she actually is somebody who did want to know about the process of therapy. And she now actually often listens to, she's not a therapist, she often listens to my webinars and she's learning all about it. And eventually I think she's going to maybe talk a little bit more about herself. But I can be very patient. So that's an example of the other extreme of understanding exactly how this works. Without yet kind of totally integrating it into how it impacts her. But otherwise, though, patients, I mean, depending upon how much they do or don't ask for, I'm willing to try to tell them stuff. I talk about from ego syntonic to ego dystonic. That's a good one. They like that, right? Ego syntonic is something they really shouldn't be doing, but it works for them. To ego dystonic, they're beginning to get it. There's a price paid. And once the mismatch between how it serves them versus the price they pay, and they work through that optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experience, the wisdom of the body can't tolerate that disconnect for long or that disequilibrium, and they work it through and hopefully evolve to a higher level. So that one. So there's certain concepts that I'll talk to them about, or I'll say stronger at the broken places. Um, or I'll say that it'll be in the relationship. Or I'll say that you'll find yourself experiencing things with me that you'd never experienced before. So it'll be from the small to the all. So what you're able to experience with me is what you'll be able to take into the outside and then experience more generally. Oh, they say, oh, I like that.
The internalization. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the internalization. So we work on it. My patient and I, we work on it. And I mean, moment by moment, I mean, you got that exactly right. I listen to what they're saying. I let them lead me. There's a dance that I do. It's called West Coast Swing. And I don't know if you have it over there, but West Coast Swing. And we have partners. We have partners at West Coast Swing, and in this particular dance, and we dance it to kind of really cool stuff, Bruno Mars, and some of the really cool, funky stuff that's out there, and so on. And in this dance, you have a leader and you have a follower, but the followers are taught to lead and the leaders are taught to follow. And men dance with men, women, women, whatever. It really doesn't matter about gender roles. It's not at all really. So there's a leader and a follower. And let me say one more thing about it, and then highlight how it's very similar, I think, to the patient-therapist relationship. So the connection is here's the leader's hand and here's the follower's hand. And so either it's either it's tension as this hand is pulling this one forward, or compression. Feel it? Compression. Mm, mm, And you watch West Coast Swing being done, and it's mesmerizingly,
I
you
will
know,
search about it on YouTube after our talk to see.
yes, 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 yes. Well, I'm going to send you several videos. Oh my God. I'm going to send you several West Coast Swing videos, some of the best that I have. And you're just going to be blown away. And I believe that the patient-therapist relationship, for the most part, the patient leads and we follow.
Mm.
The patient is this hand, leads and we follow. And they pull us along, tension, and then they this and that and that. And it's a kind of wonderful moment by moment. And I let the patient lead me, but I'm smart and I feel my heart and I'm right there. And so I can do what Les Havens, one of my mentors, had taught me is called extensions. I can do extensions. And so I start with what they've got and then I extend it. And that's where disruptive attunement can come in, where I direct them. I hadn't explained this. I direct them to where I would want them to be. But it's attuned. So it's not just randomly, oh, by the way, have you read thus and such a book? But it's based on something that I feel, quite frankly, would be good for us to sort of go to. So I can extend it with a disruptive attunement where I take them a little place to where I would want them to go. And that's then I'm leading. But then they respond or react in some way, defensively react or adaptively respond. Go ahead, say something.
I want to say that's when you bring the juxtaposition.
The juxtaposition, absolutely. The juxtaposition, right. And we're ever busy. I am with my finger ever on the pulse of the level of their anxiety. I am either challenging them or I'm supporting them. Challenge, support. I'm ever busy doing that. Plus, I do other things. I mean, I listen and I love to listen and I love to hear what people are saying and I listen and I feel it and I'm right there with them. So I'm not ever busy challenging, but it's the backdrop of holding that I provide. But then, when I can, disruptive attunement, and I provoke the holding, the provocation, navigating the edge between support, homeostatic attunement, and the provocation, disruptive attunement. And I love this work. I love what we do. It's such a privilege. And it feeds me. It just feeds me. There you go. I admitted it. So
Yeah.
what are some of your takeaways? I'd love to know. What are some of your takeaways from this absolutely, oh my God, look at the time, from this absolutely delightful time that I've had with you? It is so clear to me that you're a good one and that you're a good clinician, a wonderful clinician, and you listen so well, and you were tracking me moment by moment, and I really appreciated that. You were just gentle, you held me, and then would come up with sort of a question that was a gentle little encouraging me to sort of direct my attention to this so that I could then that.
Oh, well, thank you. And I can't now say what is my takeaways because there's a lot. I have to think. And I know people will be watching this and listening to our conversation later, but I also want you to know that I felt such a connection in our time together that it's like I know you for a long time and
uh,
we have spoken a lot of times before, although it's the first time. So,
and we never met each other in person. I mean, just a little back and forth by email, and here we are.
yeah,
Isn't it funny, though? Let me just say, I mean, and of course, that you and I created, it's a story about us, the two of us. But isn't it interesting that with some people, you meet them. And quite frankly, I mean, I had this experience a while ago at a wedding, and I'm sitting at a table, and on
yeah,
one side is my dear sweet Gunner. That's all good. On the other side is somebody I don't really know. And I wanted to be able to talk with her. But for the life of me, I couldn't think of a single thing to say. I just felt like an idiot, like I wanted to connect, and I couldn't, like it just wasn't happening. And then other times, when you get lucky with someone, as I feel I've gotten with you, it's sort of like, oh my God, we could just keep talking for as long as we want. And
yeah.
it just happens, the chemistry. And that happens also with our patients. I know that I don't always necessarily immediately connect with a patient, although I try my best. But then eventually, hopefully, we get on the same wavelength. And then in time, we can get a nice back and forth.
Yeah.
Happening.
And I just want to share how I enjoyed this being on the same wave now. And thank you. I think it will help for me personally. I think this model of you generally helps to make sense of what I'm doing and to go through it easier. I think be more present in the times that I can't make sense of it. Because I think the more you can make sense of it in different models, the more we are able to be present at the moments.
That's right. You can be present at the moment. And this is operating practically unconsciously inside of you because, yeah,
And um, I don't know how much of that can be taught, like
yeah.
how much of it is experiential that we have to go through these different processes in our own therapies or in our own trainings in each of these methods or modes of action. But I know how each of those touch on the different aspect, and all together they can make the synergy that you say. So
And if I'm allowed to mention, I hope I can, about my entirely free spot supervision Zoom sessions every week that are both live and recorded. May I mention that here to your people?
yeah,
Good. Of course. So I do it starting actually in 2 weeks, the beginning of September. It's on Thursday, Eastern time in the United States, 12 noon, and basically it's sometimes 2 hours till 2 p.m. Eastern time, ET. And it's entirely free. And I have developed a community over the course of the last 2 years, a wonderful community. It's both live and recorded, but on my private YouTube channel, because a case will be presented by one of the people in the community. And for the first hour plus, they present the case and I give feedback. It'll be a new case to me. And we talk. And I'm trying to teach my Stark method and translate psychodynamic theory into clinical practice. And then there's a chat, of course. And then we take, the presenter and I take questions and comments from the chat for the next 45 minutes or so. And I just love this. And so either people attend live, it's just a wonderful community, or people later watch the recording. And if they attend live, they get to put their comments in the chat, and they do. And otherwise, they listen to the recording and they become part of the Spot Supervision Zoom community. There's like, if they've gotten to the end of listening to this, then they know enough about the Stark method that they qualify to
Yeah.
reach out to me in an email. And if I could say my email, it's Martha Stark MD. So MarthaStarkMD at, and then I'll say it and then I'll spell it, synergymed.solutions. So it's synergy, SYNERGY, med as in medical, MED, dot solutions, SOLUTIONS. And anybody just email me and say
Yeah.
you heard this and you're in, and it'd be my pleasure.
I
And
will
I've
put,
actually had the pleasure and joy. What?
wait, I wanted to say I will put your email in the captions of the video when we.
Thank you. And I want to say I've had the pleasure and joy of having Dr. Ehsan Bidayat, who's
Oh,
Iran, and I've worked with him for a number of years, and it has been a joy and a pleasure for me. And there's some others as well from Iran. So I feel a special, my heart goes out to anyone listening to this from Iran or elsewhere.
thank you. And I personally couldn't manage the timing to attend, but you generously shared the links of the recordings. So I think you give people the access to watch it. And I had many links already from you that I could watch. So yeah, it's very generous of you to
Or if
do
they
that.
even just want to be on my email blast list and just want to receive periodically my email blasts about different things I do or different ideas I offer, PowerPoint slides. As I'd sort of indicated, I spent years, decades seeing thousands of patients. And I mean, just and got just phenomenal experience, especially working with patients who'd had previous failed therapies. So people would send me clinicians. Somehow I got the reputation that I like to work with. I do hard patients. So they send me all their hard patients and previous failed therapies. So that's part of where I kind of became more comfortable with no pain, no gain. And but I was not working on creating a social media presence. So for me, it's all I can do to even say the word Instagram. But I've learned the word Instagram, and I'm LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and all those things. So for me, I'm so grateful to you for this interview and for posting it for your people, to your massive audience, your colleagues, your students, to be able to see this. And I just commend you for your contribution to the community of learners and colleagues. And I mean, you and I've run programs in my time, and I know it's no mean feat. There's a lot that needs to be done in order to get it to happen right. So I am in awe of you and your ability to kind of pull this together in the way that you do, because I know you've done a number of these and you have quite a following, quite a following.
It's an absolute pleasure for me to do that. Yeah. So to end this, do you have anything particular that you want people to take away from this conversation? Either,
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
The most important thing, I think, is that we be able, as therapists, to position ourselves in such a way that we love doing what we're doing, that we enjoy it. And I have recently come to appreciate ever more profoundly Peter Fonagy's ideas and Anthony Bateman and his colleagues about mentalizing capacity. And I've come to appreciate that when we as clinicians can be more forthcoming with the patient, modeling for them kind of our inner state and our feelings, our thoughts, our reactivity, our responsiveness, our thoughts, our mindful, this, that, whatever, and what's going on inside of us, cause and effect, and this and that. That can be so that if it's a difficult something that we're experiencing with the patient, we can click into being a little more forthcoming, which is not what I was taught. But
Mm,
I've come to appreciate, thank you, Peter Fonagy and the others, and some of the Model 3 folks, sharing a little bit more about your own inner process in order to help the patient. So that if, for example, recently, if I can say this recently, so I had a patient come my way for a consultation, and she had been in a 40-year experience with a therapist, an analyst. And she had grown tremendously and was tremendously grateful for that. But it had ended not well. And basically, the therapist had kind of just gotten rid of her as fast as she could. So this patient, we're going to call her Mary. So Mary came to me 5 years later and was hoping she could get a consultation with me, a single consultation. It ended up being two sessions. She did stuff. And we had we'd had a session and decided that she would try to write a letter to the therapist to sort of tie up loose ends. Between the first and the second sessions, she did stuff in the emails, the several email exchanges, that was so obnoxious and so obsessional and so that I, and this isn't my proudest moment, found myself really annoyed, like enough already. No, we can't change that, and no, we can't, and no, I won't, and this and that. I found myself feeling. And so then I was going to have my second and last session with her. And we'd had the email exchange where she at one point had even said, "Excuse me." So anyway, which shows you I wasn't at my best. So, and I was not enjoying it. I'm thinking, like, ugh, why did I ever even offer her a second session? All right, but we get on the phone, and what we ended up doing was sort of amazing. She and I together. Now, again, she'd been in analysis for 40 years and so on. So she had a level of sophistication that not everyone is going to have. But what we got to was, she said, am I not allowed to share with my analyst of those 40 years my shadow side, my mean, my nasty, my aggressive, my angry side? Why am I not allowed to? Because quite frankly, I feel that I really ultimately was not okay, and that my therapist wasn't okay with me, my doing that. And ultimately, she kind of got rid of me as quickly as she could. I then shared with her, thank you, Peter Fonagy, mentalization. I decided to share with her my experience of her. I'll say in a moment what it was, saying, would that your analyst had given herself permission to do the same, which is to say, listen, Mary, I find you absolutely adorable, wonderfully non-defensive, so psychologically savvy, an absolute delight, which is why I offered you a second session, which is what I don't usually do at this stage when I'm just really trying to cut back. But you're absolute delight. However, that back and forth stuff with the emails and your yes and your yeah, and then finally, excuse me, I found really quite annoying and off-putting. And she said, really, I hadn't realized that. And then we got it that on some level, with her analyst, both that she, that her, would that her analyst had been able to share more of what was going on with the analyst, which is she adored the patient, worked with her for 40 years, but also found certain things about her really off-putting and annoying. But the therapist analyst had never let herself do that. And finally, the answer I gave, and I'm sorry, I know I'm kind of going on here, but let me just say, finally, I shared with Mary that I had a patient, a very dear patient. He was an analyst, actually. And whenever he was going to tell me about negative stuff he felt towards me, he would say, I know this is transference, but, and then he would blast me. And it was, quite frankly, made it a little easier for us both, because it was a lot transference, but it was also somewhat real too. But he framed it as, I know this is transference, but. And I said, you know, Mary, in your letter that you write her, be sure to highlight, like say some nice stuff too. Don't just highlight the hurt and anger you feel that it feels like she couldn't really accept all of who you were. And aren't you supposed to share the shadow side? Like share some good stuff too. Make it a little easier for her. Because if she's not quite comfortable, part of her training, sharing with you, mentalizing wise, all of what was going on for her in reaction to you, at least try to make it a little easier so that you'll end up better for it. And maybe she will get back to you. And that'll be a good something for you. Did that make sense what I just shared with you there?
Of course, you actually opened the door for mentalizing her pattern. And actually, then you helped her to kind of try to open the door with the analyst. So,
Yes. Yes. Yes, that's right. Yes, 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 for her, and then ultimately for the analyst. And whether the analyst is able to do it or not, sort of like whatever. That, in a way, isn't really Mary's problem. It's not my problem. But Mary can understand that, yes, technically, you get to blast the therapist. But by the way, while you're at it, why don't you also just contextualize it in a way that the analyst is a person and contextualize it a little bit? Either say, I know this is transference, but, or say all the good stuff and then blast them, and it'll be easier. And you share that. Yeah, no, that's right. And it felt so relieving for me. And by the end, with Mary, I mean, it was lovely. We had just a wonderful moment of meeting when it's sort of like she heard me when I said, quite frankly, I found and excuse me, I found that a little bit off putting. She said, oh, okay. No, I see that. And then I said, but I quite frankly adore you. I don't usually offer a second session. I think you're adorable. And I'm so glad we had what we did.
yeah.
So
So
that's
that's it.
those are my final words.
Yeah,
Wow, we did more than 2 hours.
I think
I
so.
love it. My pleasure. My pleasure. And I bet my ooh ring is going to say that I was in a regenerative, restorative mood experience for me, not stressed, but restorative, that it was restoring. Made me
Yeah,
feel good. Thank
that
you.
was for me too. Thank you so much. Yeah, I will.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.